I walked my stepdaughter down the aisle on a Saturday in October, and she didn't even tell me until 2 days before the wedding that her biological father would be doing it instead. That's how it ended. But let me back up and tell you how 17 years of my life led to that moment, because you need to understand the whole thing to understand why what I did afterward wasn't cruel. It was just honest. I met my wife when I was 43 years old. I was working as a regional manager for a trucking logistics company out of Columbus, Ohio. Nothing glamorous. Long hours, a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of coffee that had gone cold on my desk. My first marriage had ended about 4 years before that. A quiet unraveling, no big blowout, just two people who grew into different shapes and finally admitted it. No kids from that marriage. I'd made my peace with that. My wife, I'll call her my wife because that's what she was for 16 years, came into my life through a mutual friend at a backyard cookout in June. She had a daughter who was 9 years old. I knew that going in. She told me on our second date, looked me straight in the eye like she was waiting for me to flinch, and I didn't. Because why would I? A child isn't a liability. A child is just a child. Her daughter's name was Amber. She was small for her age, had her mother's eyes, and she did not want me around. That was fine. I didn't take it personally. She didn't know me. Kids don't owe strangers anything, and I was very much a stranger. Her biological father, I'll call him her biological father, because that's all he was, had been out of the picture since Amber was 4. He hadn't disappeared dramatically. He'd just sort of faded, moved to Phoenix. Called on birthdays when he remembered. Sent a card at Christmas with a $20 bill tucked inside like that squared things up. My wife had raised Amber mostly alone for 5 years before I came along, and she was exhausted in a way that she wore quietly, deep in the lines around her eyes, in the way she sometimes just sat at the kitchen table staring at nothing. I moved in with them when Amber was 11. We got married when she was 12. I paid for everything, the mortgage on the house in Westerville, Amber's school supplies, her braces, her soccer cleats, the field trips, the class photos, not because I was keeping score. I want to be clear about that. I did it because that's what you do when you're the adult in a household. You show up, you pay the bills, you go to the games, and I went to every game. Amber played soccer all through middle school and most of high school. I was there every Saturday morning with a travel mug and a lawn chair, in the rain, in the cold. Once in 30-degree weather when the field was half frozen, and there were maybe 12 parents watching in total, and I was one of them. She never thanked me for being there. I didn't need her to. But here's what I noticed, and what I kept noticing for years, slowly, the way you notice a leak in a roof. Not all at once, just one small drip at a time. My wife had a way of framing me that kept me at a distance from her daughter without ever saying anything directly cruel. It wasn't dramatic, it was subtle. It was the kind of thing you almost convince yourself you're imagining until it has gone on long enough that you can't pretend anymore. When Amber would ask to stay up late on a school night, my wife would say, "That's between you and me. We don't need to bother Garrett about that." When I'd offer to help Amber with her homework, my wife would say, "She's got it. You go relax." When Amber got her driver's license at 16 and I offered to take her out on the highway for practice, my wife said, "Her uncle's going to do that with her." The uncle she saw twice a year. Small things, tiny redirects, little fence posts, one by one, driven into the ground between me and that child. I never said anything. I told myself it was because my wife had been through something hard, raising a kid alone, being left by someone she trusted, and she had built a wall around her daughter as protection. I understood it. I even respected it, in a way. What I didn't understand, not until much later, was that the wall wasn't going to come down just because I proved I was safe. The wall was the point. Amber grew up in that house. She ate dinner at that table every night. She watched her sports teams on that couch. She brought her friends through that front door on Friday nights when they were 16, and laughing too loud and smelling like cheap body spray. I watched all of it from a comfortable distance that had been carefully maintained by a woman who slept next to me every night, and never once acknowledged what she was doing. By the time Amber was in college, University of Dayton, I paid the tuition, all 4 years, about $140,000 total. She had settled into a version of me in her life that was something like a benign fixture. I was there. I was stable. I was not her dad. That was the understood arrangement, even though nobody ever said it out loud. Her biological father resurfaced when she was 20. He'd moved back from Phoenix. Got sober, supposedly, found religion. He started calling more often, sending longer texts. Amber, to her credit, was cautious at first. She'd been disappointed by him enough times that she knew not to trust the good version of him immediately. But he kept showing up. And over about 2 years, she let him back in. I watched this happen. I watched my wife watch this happen, and I noticed that she did not do then what she had done with me. She didn't put up fence posts. She didn't redirect. She let Amber build that relationship with her biological father, without a word of caution, without a single quiet, "Now just be careful, sweetheart," even though he had earned every reason for caution and I had earned none. I sat with that for a long time. I didn't say anything about it to my wife. What was I going to say? "I notice you're not undermining this relationship the way you undermined mine." It would have started a fight, and the fight wouldn't have changed anything. You can't argue someone into giving you what they were never willing to give you. Amber got engaged when she was 26. His name was Derek. He was fine. He worked in commercial real estate. He had a firm handshake and a bland smile, and he clearly made her happy, which was the only thing that mattered. The engagement party was at our house. I grilled. I bought 4 cases of beer and a case of wine. I set up the tables in the backyard. I shook Derek's hand and told him he was getting a good one, because that was true. I meant it. My wife handled most of the wedding planning with Amber. That was fine. I wasn't expecting to be deeply involved. I just expected to be invited. 2 days before the wedding, 2 days, my wife sat me down at the kitchen table after dinner. She had that look on her face that I had learned over 16 years meant she was about to tell me something she'd known for a while and had been avoiding saying. She folded her hands in front of her, and she told me that Amber had decided she wanted her biological father to walk her down the aisle. She told me this like it was logistical information, like she was telling me the ceremony started at 4 instead of 3:30. I sat there for a long time without saying anything. I asked her when Amber had made this decision. She said a few weeks ago. A few weeks. My wife had known for a few weeks, and she had said nothing to me. She had watched me go with her to the venue to drop off decorations. She had watched me write the check for the rehearsal dinner deposit. She had watched me pick up my rented tuxedo from the dry cleaner on Thursday, hang it on the back of the bedroom door, and say nothing. I asked my wife what she thought about it. She said it was Amber's day and it was Amber's choice. I nodded. I got up from the table. I went out to the garage and I sat in my truck for about 40 minutes with the engine off. It was dark. I could hear the neighbor's dog barking somewhere down the street. I was 61 years old. I had been in that child's life for 17 years. I had been a quiet, steady, never complaining presence. I had written checks and shown up and never asked to be called Dad. I had never made it about me. And the one moment, the one ceremonial, publicly visible moment, where someone might have looked at the seating chart or the processional order and said, "That's the man who raised her." That moment had been quietly handed to a man who sent $20 bills and Christmas cards from Phoenix. I was not going to make a scene. That was never something I was going to do. Amber's wedding was not going to be disrupted because of me. That's not who I am, but I was done. Not dramatically done. Not in a way that required a confrontation. Just done in the quiet way that happens when you've been running on a reserve you didn't know had limits and you finally hit the bottom. The morning of the wedding, before anyone else was up, I sat at the kitchen table and I wrote a letter. Not a mean letter. I want to be clear about that too. It wasn't angry. It was just true. I wrote down what I had contributed over 17 years, not to shame anyone. I wrote it because I needed it to exist somewhere outside my own head, in black and white on actual paper. The mortgage payments, the tuition, the braces, the car I bought her when she was 19, and working a part-time job that paid $11 an hour. The medical bills from when she broke her wrist sophomore year of high school, and the insurance had a gap. The years of groceries and utilities and school fees and soccer equipment and 100 other things that add up quietly over time when you're the one who shows up. I wrote the total at the bottom. I'm not going to say the number here, but it was substantial. It was the kind of number that, if you saw it all in one place, would stop you cold. And then I wrote one more line. I wrote, "I did all of this because it was the right thing to do. Not because I expected anything in return. But I think you should know." I folded the letter and put it in an envelope. I left it on the kitchen table under Amber's coffee mug, the one she'd use when she came down before getting ready for the ceremony. Then I put on my tuxedo. I drove to the venue. I sat in the third row. I watched her biological father walk my stepdaughter down the aisle, and I did not let my face show a thing. The wedding was beautiful. She was beautiful. Derek cried when he saw her, and I thought, good. That's what's supposed to happen. I ate dinner at my assigned table. I made small talk with Derek's parents, who were pleasant people from Cincinnati. I danced one song with my wife, who held my hand the whole time and didn't seem to understand that I was somewhere very far away inside myself. I left at 10 o'clock, told her I was tired, drove home alone, and sat in my truck in the driveway for a long time. She found the letter when they got back from the honeymoon 2 weeks later. My wife called me on a Tuesday afternoon. I was at work. She said Amber wanted to talk to me. I said okay. She said, "Are you free this weekend?" I said yes. We met at a diner about halfway between their apartment and our house. Amber came alone. She looked like her mother when she was nervous. That same stillness, that same careful arrangement of her hands on the table. She said she'd read the letter. I said I figured. She said she didn't know what to say. I told her she didn't have to say anything. I told her I hadn't written it to make her feel guilty. I had written it because I realized, somewhere around 4 in the morning the night before her wedding, that nobody in my life had ever actually seen what I had done. Not really. Not completely. And I needed someone to see it before I moved past it. She was quiet for a while. Then she asked me why I had never said anything. All those years, she said. Why didn't you ever tell me it bothered you? That you felt pushed out? I thought about how to answer that for a long time. I told her the truth. I told her that when she was 9 years old and not sure whether she could trust me, I decided that my job was not to need things from her. My job was to be the thing she could count on. A person she could ignore, if she needed to. A person she could take for granted, if that made her feel safe. I had signed up for that role consciously. I had understood what I was agreeing to. What I hadn't understood was that the role was never going to change. Because the woman I married had made sure of that. Amber looked at me when I said that, and I could see her doing the math. Working backward through 17 years. All those small moments where she'd been quietly redirected away from me. Her mother's voice, low and casual. We don't need to bother him with that. Her uncle's going to take care of that. It's between you and me, she said. I didn't realize she was doing that. I believed her. I do believe her. Kids don't see the architecture of what's being built around them. They just live inside it. I told her I didn't need an apology. What was done, and I meant that sincerely. I was 61 years old. I didn't have the energy for resentment. Resentment is expensive, and I'd already paid enough. But I told her one more thing. I told her that I was going to be stepping back. Not disappearing. Not cutting anyone off. Just stepping back. That the version of me who showed up for everything and asked for nothing and took up very little space, that version was retired. If she wanted a relationship with me going forward, it was going to have to be one where I was actually present. Where I was a person in the room, not a piece of furniture. She nodded slowly. She picked up her coffee and held it for a while without drinking. Then she said something I didn't expect. She said, "I'm sorry I let Mom make you invisible. I had to look out the window for a second. At the parking lot. At the gray October sky. Just to have somewhere to put my eyes." I told her I appreciated that. We sat there for another hour. We talked about Derek, about their apartment, about nothing in particular. The way people do when they're starting something over. Carefully. Finding the footing. I separated from my wife 8 months later. It wasn't a screaming fight. It was a long, honest conversation that had been waiting 16 years to happen. I told her what I had seen her do. I told her I understood why. I understood that she was scared, that she'd been hurt, that she had built a fence around her daughter from a place of genuine love and genuine fear. I wasn't angry at her for being wounded, but I was done living inside the damage, she cried. She said she hadn't realized. I believed her about that, too, partly. I think there are things we do so quietly, so automatically, that we genuinely lose track of the fact that we're doing them. I live alone now in a 2-bedroom apartment in Gahana, about 20 minutes from where the house is. I kept my furniture. I kept my truck. I have a small patio where I drink my coffee in the morning and watch the birds at the feeder I hung up last spring. Amber calls me on Sunday evenings. Not every week, but most weeks. We talk for 20-30 minutes. About her job, about Derek, about nothing important. It's easy now in a way it never was when we were all living under the same roof and pretending everything was fine. Last month, she called to tell me she's pregnant. First grandchild. She said she wanted me to know before they told anyone else. I sat with that for a minute. This woman who once looked at me like I was a stranger in her house, who walked down the aisle on the arm of a man who sent $20 bills and Christmas cards, who read a letter on a Tuesday afternoon and finally saw me. She said she hoped the baby would know me, really know me. The way she wishes she had, earlier. I told her there was plenty of time. And I meant it, because that's still who I am. That's the part that doesn't change. The part that shows up, that stays steady, that doesn't need the credit, but that finally, after 61 years, has learned to need to be seen. I'm not invisible anymore, I decided that. And that decision, quiet as it was, changed everything.